When I was 13, the dawning of a new millennium took place on New Year's Eve. While people were fearing the worst with the Y2K bug or out partying and drinking, I was home alone. In 1996, my parents split up, and from there they divorced, and my mother and I moved across the country from Oregon to Tennessee with her best friend. On the eve of the year 2000, I was home alone, and my mother was currently out of state. Now this didn't worry me, as this was not the first time. I often came home to find a note on the kitchen counter saying they had gone to Florida for a few days and that there were groceries in the fridge. Since the divorce, she was regularly leaving me alone for long periods to go to Florida. We lived on a quiet road, feeling safe in our little bubble. One night, while watching a movie, I heard strange sounds outside. I assumed they were from a neighbor's party. Suddenly, the power went out. I sat in the dark, thinking it would come back on. Then, I heard a noise in the kitchen, like the back door closing. My heart pounded. The back door led directly into the living room where I was sitting. A few seconds passed after I had heard the sound, and I was straining my ears to pick up anything that wasn't supposed to be there. Every noise suddenly felt magnified. When footsteps sounded on the floor, I immediately slithered off the couch onto all fours, crawled around the ottoman, and started as slowly and as quietly as I could make my way toward the space between the love seat and the couch. I knew I could fit under the side table and be completely hidden by the dark and the ottoman from playing hide-and-go-seek in the dark. Many times with my friends during sleepovers. I was nearly there when the footsteps became more apparent. I knew from the sound of them that whoever it was making their way through the kitchen now toward the living room. They weren't hurried or anything. It was like they were just moving around in the kitchen. I glanced up from where I was crouched on the floor, and to my horror, there was a dark silhouette standing in the archway between the two rooms. To my credit, I didn't scream. However, I did panic. I stood immediately to my feet from my hiding spot and ran down the hallway, and I believe the only reason I wasn't overcome was because the person chasing me had to get around the ottoman in the dark to follow me. I did what all children do when they're afraid, and I bypassed the front door, the guest bedroom, the bathroom, and ran to the farthest door down the hallway, my room. In all honesty, I probably wouldn't have been able to get the front door unlocked and open in time, as it was right off the side of the couch. For my 10th birthday, I got a blue-fronted Amazon parrot named Boo. His large cage dominated my room, though he usually roamed freely. One night, I locked myself in my room, but the flimsy doorknob offered little security. I had barely gotten the door shut and locked when the person on the other side knocked on it. I have no idea why they knocked, if they did it to mock me or to scare me, but I knew in my heart that my little lock was not going to keep whoever it was on the other side out of my room. It didn't keep my mother out when we were arguing, and it wouldn't stand up to brute force. I was panicking, on the verge of tears when the person started laughing. It was low, quiet, and because of that, it was even more frightening. It wasn't like manic laughter, but as if they were genuinely amused. It was the laughter that really frightened me, and I started heavily, hysterically crying and looking around my room to figure out what I could do. That was when I realized Boo's cage would fit almost perfectly between the door and the wall of my closet. The cage moved quietly on my carpeted floor, but as I pushed it into place, it scraped against the door and alerted whoever it was on the other side that I was trying to barricade myself in, because suddenly they threw themselves at my door, and you could hear the sound of the wood splintering and the door handle being twisted violently. Boo, who had been stirred by the movement awake, began literally screaming and flapping his wings. I might have screamed with him, but honestly, I don't remember screaming. I just remember being extremely scared. Terrified, I huddled under my bed, the metal frame offering little comfort. Boo continued screaming. I couldn't bring myself to leave, fearing the intruder might be waiting outside the window. It felt like hours before I finally drifted off to sleep. I woke up to daylight, the fear returning instantly. Scared the intruder might still be in the house, I decided to crawl out the window and run to a neighbor. Crawling out a window is a lot harder than it looks, and I did it less than gracefully, as I was not, and still am not, the most coordinated human being. Once I was back on my feet, however, I carefully made my way around the house, and that's when I noticed that the back door was wide open. Scared, but feeling braver now that I was outside and that it was morning instead of a pitch-black night. I walked up the back steps and peered inside. Seeing nothing out of the ordinary, no terrifying man leering at me, basically, I decided to go inside. Looking back, I cringe on how stupid this could have turned out, and that I wish I could have told my younger self to make the smarter move and just go get help, but thankfully, no one was inside the house. I did a terrified search of the house, checking closets, under beds, everywhere. I even checked my mom's room. When I was sure no one was there, I noticed the breaker box was open. The main switch had been flipped. I flipped it back on, locked the doors, and called my mom, breaking down in tears. My mom's trips to Florida became family trips after that. I still fear being alone, always thinking about what I'd do if someone broke in. Every strange noise my cats make sends me into a panic. I hope you never terrorized anyone else. I'll never forget that night. Last New Year's Eve, my friends and I decided to camp in a tent near the woods. We were laughing and having a good time when we heard rustling in the leaves. We shrugged it off, thinking it was just an animal. Then, as midnight approached, with the flashlight and music blaring, things took a terrifying turn. We heard this strange chirping noise outside. Not like a bird, but something unearthly. Scared we were about to be ambushed, I demanded my friends turn off the lights and music. They thought I was crazy at first, but I insisted. When they did, the chirping returned. We were all terrified. I, having some karate training, felt a bit braver. I figured I could handle it, or at least protect my friends. They tried to play it off as a firework, but I knew they were scared too. We continued fooling around, trying to ignore the screech chirping. Then, it sounded closer. Much closer. This time, I could hear it clearly. It was huge, and right outside our tent. The chirping started again, and everyone freaked out. One friend called her older brother for help. With him around, the sounds stopped. We went for a walk, and my friends were terrified of the dark. I, however, found it intriguing. I also hoped we'd encounter the creature to prove them wrong about their bravado. I was secretly terrified too, but her brother had a knife, and I was prepared to use it if needed. My friends freaked out and asked what I thought it was. I'm into the paranormal, but not usually paranoid. I jokingly suggested it could be a skinwalker or a flesh gate, as I'd read they mimic voices to lure victims. I think I scared them a bit. We heard it again. At this point, everyone was shitting bricks, and one of them eventually called her older brother to come and hang out with us for a while. While he was there, just our luck, we couldn't hear the chirp screech anymore. Damn. We hung out with him for a while until we all decided to go on a walk with. The walk was fun, and my friends were terrified because we were walking around in the dark. But I've always liked the dark, as it was so vast and mysterious. I was also hoping we would find the flesh gate so my friends would stop acting like stuck-up little shits that weren't scared, because I could see they were shitting themselves. Part of me was also terrified to see what would happen if we stumbled across a flesh gate, but her older brother had a knife with him, and I was prepared to stab it if he wasn't. Later that night, we were blasting music with a strobe light, probably not the best idea. My friend's brother had left us a knife. They decided I was the only one brave enough to use it, so I held it all night. I couldn't resist taking it out of the sheath, though. Then, the chirping returned. I unzipped the tent, knife drawn, and heard something scurry away. Since my friends didn't hear it, I ignored it. Later, I was the only one awake. I heard a blood-curdling scream howl circling the tent. One friend briefly woke up and said it was probably a party, but I knew she was just trying to get back to sleep. I, on the other hand, can go days without sleep. Believe me when I say, I didn't let my guard down once. I listened to this thing and the location the cries took place. I wasn't about to let some fucking flesh gate or some shit come and kill my friends and I on a night that was supposed to be fun. I drew the knife a few times and practiced slashing the air in case it attacked, but it never did. The fucker just spent hours taunting me, trying to draw me out. I was incredibly tempted to run out there just to get a look at it, but I knew that was exactly what it wanted. Waiting for me not to be in a group so it could pick the threat off, then my friends. There was no way in hell I would let it anywhere near my friends. The older brother had left to go to a friend's house later that night as well, and the friend we were all staying with lived with her grandma. no strong men. I lived around the neighborhood and both my mom and my dad were home. My dad is a big guy standing at 6 feet 2 and strong as hell, but it would be too far to run. I couldn't go out there to see what it was even if I wanted to. Even though I'm pretty damn fast, I was weak considering how late it was, and I would become this thing's prey. Knowing this, I just laid back, knife at the ready, listening in absolute horror. True vulnerability hit when I was alone with 3 lives in my hands, facing an unseen creature. It taunted us all night. I was armed with a knife, but I doubted it would even scratch the thing. I sat in silence until dawn, driven to the edge. Convinced it was gone, I left a note and the knife for my friends and walked home. The streets were dark, and my glasses were smudged. I scanned constantly, fearing an ambush. Finally reaching home, I stumbled inside, exhausted. My friends later dismissed it as a firework or an animal, but I knew the truth. They probably thought I was exaggerating with mentions of flesh gates and skinwalkers, but I truly believe that's what it was. We haven't camped since. The memory is too vivid. A few years ago, when I was 19, I was walking home from a New Year's Eve fireworks display. It was 3 a.m., and I was in my safe neighborhood in Sydney, Australia. My friends wanted to call a taxi, but I insisted on walking. The walk was long, and my friend Aiden complained most of the way. Rowan was quiet. I was cheerful until we reached my street and parted ways. As I passed a cake shop, I noticed a man across the street. He looked at me intently, which gave me a strange feeling. I hurried on, dismissing it as paranoia. My street was darker than usual. As I passed the bowling club, I kept looking behind me, feeling increasingly uneasy. There was no one around. Halfway down the street, I saw something on the path and stepped onto the road to avoid it. That's when I saw someone behind me. They weren't close, but they weren't far. My heart leaped into my throat. I hadn't seen them before. I tried to call my friends, Aiden and Rowan, but couldn't get through. I grew increasingly anxious but didn't dare look back. Finally, I reached my driveway. As I walked up, I glanced back and saw the figure again. It seemed like they were about to step onto my driveway. I thought it might be my brother, Jonathan, but something about the figure didn't seem right. My mother was waiting for me, and I was so relieved. I left the outside light on, thinking Jonathan might be coming. My mother told me he had returned home 2 hours ago. I went to take a shower. As I showered, I thought about the figure. I wasn't sure if they were following me. Then, I heard a strange sound at my window, like someone resting their hands against it. I turned up the water and crouched under the window, terrified. After a few minutes, I cautiously emerged. As I turned on the heater light, I noticed small blue lights at the window, like a phone keypad lit up. I switched off the light and huddled in the corner, terrified. Then, more blue lights came on outside, shining through the window. I was sure someone was there. I ran to my parents' room, trembling and sobbing. My father heard footsteps hurrying down the driveway. I couldn't sleep that night. I was still terrified the next morning, especially when I heard my father go into the backyard.